Across America, you're listening to the Veterans Impact Show, featuring stories of veterans who continue the mission in their communities with honor, courage, and commitment. Brought to you by Fairway Independent Mortgage Corporation and the Texas Veterans Chamber of Commerce.
Hey, good morning, everybody out there in cyberspace and our friends on the radio. Welcome to the Veteran Impact Show. This was a show created and dedicated to the concept of Charlie Mike. Charlie Mike is a military term that stands for continue the mission. And I am very, very excited this morning. I'm going to try to hold off on the adjectives in deference to my boy Jim, who is on his way back from the Navy League meetings in Orlando, Florida. So he won't be with us this week, but Charlie Mike is the concept that so many veterans have embraced. As they leave the military, they take those traits and they try to make a difference in our world. And what I'm excited about is absolutely one of my favorite veteran service organizations is going to be on this morning. I'd like to introduce you and welcome Chief T.C. Beckett. Good morning, Chief. How are you this morning?
Hey, good morning, Chuck. I'm doing very, very well.
Believe it or not, once he gets started, he will come out of that shy exterior. But he has started something that's absolutely fascinating because his vision is literally to feed the world, starting with our homeless veterans, which is something near and dear to my heart. As many of our listeners know, my favorite veteran service organization, the beneficiary of our golf tournament, of our Reads Across America program, and other events, is Homeless Veteran Services of Dallas. And T.C. Beckett, Chief Beckett, has created a system to help feed those people. And Chief, I'd like you to start by talking about, just give us the 60-second elevator pitch on what you do and how you do it. It's the how that's so amazing.
Sure, yes, thank you. Yeah, and it is. And yes, we feed homeless veterans from our aquaponics and hydroponics greenhouses. We grow essentially. So everything is grown within containers, greenhouses all year round, and so I started that was the method that I ran across. And you and I were talking off mic earlier about the Epcot Center. That's actually what got me into aquaponics, was realizing, hey, we can actually grow with water only now, and so this has been around for a long time.
So explain that, drill deep into the Epcot Center and what we both saw as we toured it.
Yeah. So many years ago, so I've been in Texas since 95, and I grew up on a farm in Indiana and had a little garden in my backyard for my family, but trying to figure out how to keep that garden tended and watered. And so I was doing some research, and the Epcot Center came up in the search results. And so I got to looking. And it's a fish tank. It's water. They have separate plants and very, very beautifully large systems. Vegetables. But I didn't see any dirt. But upon further research, it's the byproduct of that fish water is what provides the nutrients for the plants. Not the effluent part. It's the ammonia part. So the ammonia stays in that water. And so essentially we say we feed the fish and the fish feed the plants, which is technically correct. So it's a closed loop system. The water continuously circulates throughout the entire system through the fish tank, back into the media beds, into the rafts and all that. And yeah, so it's fish water. It's just fish water.
So everything is fed with fish water, and this is the hydroponic tank. So what is an aquaponic tank?
So that's with aquaponics. Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay. And the other thing that you mentioned is you said a container. Talk a little bit about what you've discovered and what you use to create your, and I'm not sure what we call them, your sites, I guess.
Yes, right. So sites. So we are now introducing our container garden, which is a 40-foot insulated shipping container. And the reason that I'm now focused on that is for a number of factors, one of which is it's a mobile unit. I can build them at my central location site in Keller. Once they're finished, put them back on a flatbed semi-truck and deploy them and stand them up in any of the other locations that have requested our services or our greenhouses. So, but yeah, we originally started out in a traditional hoop house. Now we've expanded into larger greenhouses. And we can still do those, but I'm really enjoying this container method because I can control all of the elements. I can grow all year round at about 72 degrees. I don't have to worry about storms coming in and tearing up everything.
Mm-hmm. So I should have had my next question set up a little better. Sorry about this. Kind of a little bit of a in the process. So you take a shipping container, you build it in Keller, and then you can deploy it. So what is the cost? If someone were to come in and say, hey, I really want one of those, what would it cost somebody to do? Or cost you to do to ship to somebody?
Right, yes. So right now they are just above $95,000 for that for a complete unit, which is actually we're able to do it for a fair amount less than other open market systems because we use a lot of our own veterans and volunteers to do that. So market value on those is $150,000 to $170,000.
Wow.
But what you get is you get a system that grows 3,500 to 4,000 plants all year round. And again, it takes up, a shipping container is 8 foot wide. I mean, an 8 foot footprint. It doesn't take up a whole lot of space, but yet it generates a massive amount of food. So again, there's a lot of reasons that we're now looking in, that we're now developing our container gardens.
And how much food will you talked about 300 to 400 plants, but how much food does that create?
Oh, no. 3,500 plants.
3,500 plants in each one. Wow.
Yes. So we'll harvest an average of about 240 pounds a week. That will feed about 1,000 people a week.
Wait a minute. Give me those numbers again.
So about 240 pounds a week, which translates to about 1,000 people fed a week.
Wow.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
That's amazing. I'm blown away, and even today I'm learning more and more about what you do. Let's talk about this is the other thing that staggered me. You go into the grocery store and you see basic fruits and vegetables. Talk a little bit about how your fruits and vegetables are different.
Yes, no, I appreciate that. So I get on my rant when I start talking about, do you realize that most of the produce that we eat comes from Salina, California? It's long hauled, 3 or 4 days before it finally gets to the store. You buy it from the store and it sits in the refrigerator. By the time you go to eat that produce that you've purchased from a store, it's lost about 50% of its nutritional value.
Wow.
It's really not very healthy food for you. And it's harvested from the soil. And let me go back to amount of production. So typically in California, you'll get about 2 heads of lettuce per square foot per season.
Okay.
It's just that's just about how many you can grow. And again, they cut it at the head and then they ship it. Well, we harvest our entire plant, the roots intact. What that means is that plant is still living. It will stay living for a week to 2 weeks, drawing nutrients out of those roots, which is almost an irrelevant point because by the time once we harvest and deliver it, that food is consumed like immediately. I mean, we're handing out food directly to those in need and it gets consumed that day. However, if you wanted to store it for a while, the food that we harvest is 50% more nutritious than this food you'll buy in the store.
It's just that staggers me, and you told me, and I'm going to ask you to share it again. I don't know if you remember it. You talked about cantaloupes, and I love cantaloupe. Might be my favorite
yes.
fruit. Tell our audience the cantaloupe story.
So, we always get, there's like the top three questions. How much does it cost to build this?
Right.
How much can it grow? What can you grow? And so there's a lot of things that hundreds of different types of plants that, it's agriculture. We're just using water. However, some things grow exceedingly well. Cantaloupe is one of them. And the size of these cantaloupes is about as big as my head. And for whatever, I think maybe it's because it's got the direct source of all that water, but they're huge. And so last year we had them trellis about 15 feet up the back wall on the greenhouse, and they were just massively huge. And so one of the things when we give tours in the greenhouse, we always take people out to the soil garden, and we have a soil garden. And we will show the plants that we've started in the soil garden, and then those same exact seedlings are inside the greenhouse. And you can clearly, it's very obvious that you can see the difference. The tomatoes we're growing are now 10 feet tall. Out in the soil, they're about 2 feet tall. So
wow.
That's one of the things I didn't mention is that because of this technique, that water that's constantly flushing through the system, plants grow about 30% faster. And there are actually some organizations that can even push that even almost up to 50% faster. So I'm yielding a head of lettuce in less than 30 days on average.
And this compares to a head of lettuce coming out of, say, Salina, California, that they're getting one every 6 months.
Yes, right.
If they were getting two a year, that'd be one every 6 months.
Sure, thereabouts, yes, per square foot. So again, we grow 8 to 10 times more food per square foot. So what that translates to is about 33 heads of lettuce a year for me per square foot compared to 2 in the soil. So
I continue to be overwhelmed with the figures. And this is one of the reasons why I think that you've got a really good chance of going viral as our country starts to look at things like this as the available land to farm. And that gets into a whole nother discussion. But we are, and we live in Frisco, and I'll give you a little bit about Frisco. This is cotton country. It's deep black soil. And we're putting buildings on it and houses on it and a PGA golf course on it. And all of that's great because people have to have a place to live. But we have effectively lost some of the best farmland in Texas to development. And as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, this is what we need to be doing to replace that farmland to provide a higher quality food. And to feed our homeless veterans. And that's one of the things we were just talking about that I will be working on because we will have one of these containers by the end of the year down at Homeless Veteran Services of Dallas.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. And having
so you talk about soil, and sorry for interrupting.
Go, please.
One important part. So the soil, yes, we're not making any more soil. It takes about 100 years to develop 1 inch of soil. But one of the other big benefits of using an aquaponics or hydroponic system is that it uses 90% less water. I talked about all that water recirculating. Right. Well, it does. It continuously recirculates. So that which we would have to replace is what the plants absorb. So I think about it. Once you water your fields, you water your plants, your gardens, and you're dumping out water into the ground.
Right.
It's a one-time use only.
Right.
And I challenge most people to consider wondering how much water do you actually dump out of a hose to maintain a garden? Well, we know exactly how many gallons of water we use every single day. It's all measured. We know, when we just discharge fish waste, which I spoke earlier about an outside soil garden, we have our fish wastes piped out to that soil garden. So it fertilizes that soil garden. So essentially nothing is wasted. Not a single drop of water is wasted from our systems. So we're losing topsoil. Farmers are retiring 2 times faster than we're creating new ones. The average age of a farmer is about 63. Water depletion is being depleted rapidly. Those of us in the farming industry, we've known this for a long time, that we need to generate 70% more food. You and I were talking about this earlier, right. 70% more food by the year 2050. 70%.
We're going to come back to that on the other side. We need to take a break.
Okay. Yeah.
Robin used to hate this, so I'll use this line. We're going to pay some of the bills, do some of the other stuff. We're going to take a break for our radio listeners, for our Facebook listeners. We're going to be back on the flip side. We're good? Okay. So, TC, we have two audiences. We have a live audience, or we're going to be tape delayed. So we have a tape delay audience, and they need the breaks so they can run their commercials. And then we have our Facebook audience, and we are still taping for Facebook. We are actually not going live today, but we will be taped, so you will have this set up. And that is one of the things that I thought about as we were sitting here. We've got your website up, and we're going to talk about that when we come back from the break. But the one thing that I would love to see you do is a 3 to 10 minute YouTube-style video of everything we're talking about as people are walking through and actually seeing the inside of a container, shipping container, just to create people are geared to visuals, and it makes it a very easy visual to push out. You were asking me about the golf tournament earlier, and one of our PR guy is actually working on a video for us that'll be 3 to 5 minutes long, but it'll show the golfers and show everybody having fun and all that good stuff, as just a way to promote. You know, we got to get that we got to make social media work for us. But the interesting thing is you're talking about this, and recently they had, and I'll tie this together very quickly. Some of our regulars realize I tend to go off on tangents, although I do eventually loop around so you understand why that particular synapse fired in my my oddly working brain. But I was watching the History Channel special on Teddy Roosevelt, who was one of my favorite presidents, and he was the right president at the right time. And he has moved up my top 5 list of best presidents, because when you look at what
I'm on a podcast. Yes.
When you look at what he did, the impact it makes today. This is the man that created the national park systems. But this was a true conservative, and many have turned conservative into a bad word. It's never bothered me, but that's okay. But when you look at what a conservative is, they are ones trying to make the best use of the land. And I don't think we're necessarily doing that, and there's a lot of reasons for it. I don't want to get into that debate, but what you're doing is true conservatism. Is that even a word? I've created a new word. We'll have to get the Urban Dictionary lined up for that one.
I think that's a valid word.
Cool. We'll use that. I think people know what I mean. But you're creating a system that as we grow larger and larger and larger, we can feed more and more people. And we're seeing this right now with what's happened with the invasion of Ukraine. We're 1 minute from coming back to our radio audience, and it'll be a short segment. But Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe, supposedly, and they're not producing anything, and it's affecting everything. And everything's interrelated, and everything's affecting. You've created a way, and it's sustainable on multiple levels. Not only is it self-sustaining, but it also helps sustain humans. And the one thing we're hearing about is obesity in America is a huge problem. And I'm, again, going off on a little bit of a tangent, but you're talking about putting healthy fruits and vegetables in front of more Americans. 10 seconds. We got 10 seconds, and we'll be back. Our Facebook audience has gotten used to our breaks and leaving and all of that. And they realize they're special because they get the whole show.
Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. Thanks to our great sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage Corporation and the Texas Veterans Chamber of Commerce. Now, let's continue this conversation.
Our Facebook listeners have been with us. For all of our radio listeners, welcome back, especially to our fans in South Texas. We've got quite a few stations that are picking us up down there, and we're glad to have you. We are the Charlie Mike Show, basically. It's called the Veteran Impact Show, and the one ask I'm going to make is find us on YouTube and like us. Follow us on YouTube. It really helps us to push our media message out if we have more followers, and it's got to do with the algorithm. Don't ask me to explain all of that because I don't understand it and they change all the time. But the more people we have, the more they push this out and help us share the message. And it's a powerful message. It's the message of Charlie Mike. And Charlie Mike means continue the mission. And one of the things that our veterans have done is to continue the mission of service and leadership in our nation. It's what the show is dedicated to. We've had some amazing guests. One of my favorites from North Texas is Chief T.C. Beckett, who is with us right now. And we are talking about Veterans Produce. So you can find Veterans Produce at produce.org. Check out the website. Our Facebook listeners can see it up right now. But he talks about what his mission is and what he is trying to accomplish. I find it absolutely brilliant. He is truly trying to solve one of the biggest problems we have today, and that is critical needs. And I'm trying to think, there's a term for it, and I thought it would pop right to my mind, but it's food scarcity. We have 1 in 5 Americans, particularly kids, who are not sure where their next meal is coming from. And for them, it's normally a package of ramen or a box of macaroni and cheese. And this is all processed foods, probably some of the worst things that you can eat. And we are talking about creating good, fresh, nutrient-dense fruits and vegetables. And TC, you know that I think you are getting close to walk-on-water status, not statue. You're not a statue yet. I don't think we could ever make a statue of TC because he's constantly in movement. And as you can tell, TC is also a friend. He has become a friend, and I love his mission.
Well,
Go.
Well, I appreciate that. And thank you for mentioning about the nutrition. And so, you know, I started Veterans Produce to feed homeless veterans, but it's becoming very, very obvious that the quality of food that we raise, not only is it far superior than most of that which you'll get stores, but we are now working with a number of other veteran organizations, PTSD therapy programs that are recognizing the value of wholesome food. Healthy food is paramount to healthy body and mind. And if you feed the body with healthy food, it will the body and mind, and it will have a positive impact. That is, it can actually have reduced PTSD symptoms just by properly feeding the body. So, and so we've got a number of VSOs that are now interested in that want one of our systems. And so, so simply beyond having food, and you talked about food insecurity. Yes, that number is growing exponentially. So our vision is to eradicate veteran hunger due to homelessness nationwide. And so how we're doing that, is using a modular method, these container gardens. And if you could imagine, it's a completely sealed system. CEA is what it's called, Controlled Environmental Agriculture, where we control every single element of that goes on there.
And this is all done in a shipping container.
Open up the step inside. Shipping container, 40-foot shipping container. Yes, insulated shipping container. It'll have air conditioning. It'll be quite nice, actually, here in Texas to work in that air-conditioned space. And so, but yes, so when you walk inside, you'll see the nursery section. This is where the whole process starts. We start with the seedlings. The seedlings transfer to a propagation or a flood table where they get introduced to nutrients and light. And then you walk into that, open up a door, and you'll see racks and rows and rows and rows upon rows of growing shelves. And so we estimate we'll have 16 4-foot wide racks, 4 shelves. I'm trying to do 5, but I think right now we're going to sit at 4. And so with that whole shipping container will grow an estimated 3,500 plants at one time.
Wow. And so that's inside the shipping container.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, yeah. And lots of pretty LED lights. The whole thing's controlled by LED lights. We change the spectrum or the type of light based on the growth of the plant. Little seedlings require different kinds of light, not as intense. And then as they grow bigger, we change the light spectrums and intensity. So that's all we dial that up. It's all very scientific,
Oh,
quite
amazing.
fascinating. It looks quite pretty, in fact. Actually.
We're going to talk about how many people it will take to run one of your shipping containers, but we're about to take another break. This was a short segment. Facebook, we'll still be chatting for you guys, but when we come back for our radio listeners, we'll talk about how many people it takes to run one of these. Okay, so we're going to go back to something you were talking about before, because I'm going to save the... I was also stunned at how little maintenance these require once they're set up. But I want to talk about something. You say it costs about $90,000 for you to, and I love the use of the term deploy, a very veteran military term, but to deploy one of these to a location that's, basically needs a 10-foot by 40-foot footprint, which is basically the end of the parking lot, out on the edge of the parking lot where nobody parks anyway, except for my wife. She loves to walk. Hey, let's park over here. And I said, well, honey, if we're going to do that, we could park at the store that's a mile down the road and walk over here.
It's funny. Your wife and my wife must know each other. My wife is the same way. It's like, I can get some exercise. It's like, sweetheart, I worked all day in a hot greenhouse. I don't need any more exercise.
Exactly. And I don't mind, parking, where there are not many cars, so nobody's banging my door, but sometimes it gets ridiculous. But we're talking about a 10-foot by 40-foot footprint, and it's, about 12, 15 feet high? No. The high cubes are 9'6". Oh, wow.
9.5 feet, yes.
Oh, okay. So this is not a huge footprint, but you were talking, and give me that number again. How many people can you feed a week?
Yes. So we average. We estimate that we'll average about 240 pounds, and we can dial that accordingly based on the demand. But 240 a week. Each pound serves approximately 6 people. Serving size of produce is about 2.5 ounces. Okay. So that translates to about over 1,000 people a week. 1,000 people a week.
Okay, I'm going to get one of your cantaloupes, and I'm eating it by myself. And if that skews your numbers, I really don't care. I love the cantaloupe story because it's my favorite fruit.
Oh yeah, it's amazing, and we don't actually count the fruits. The numbers I'm throwing out are just produce, so herbs, lettuces, arugula, spinach. I count the poundage of produce. We're also going to grow strawberries, and those are measured by bushel or some other unit of measure, but I'm only referring to about a dozen different varieties of lettuce that we currently grow.
So I can eat all the cantaloupe I want, and it's not going to skew your numbers at all.
No, it's fine. Yeah.
We're having some fun with that. We're having a little bit of fun, and we're about to slide back from our break. So our Facebook people have hopefully gotten used to our breakage in the action, because what we're going to talk about when we come back is how many people it takes to run one of these 10-foot by 40-foot containers. How much time have we got before we come back for the break?
50 seconds.
Oh, we got 50 seconds. Okay, well, I can vamp a little bit here. But we're also going to talk about, and I want to get into, what was that? I don't know if you've ever read any of Malcolm Gladwell's stuff. He wrote Blank and he wrote Tipping Point. But at some point, and we'll share this with our radio listeners when we come back, I want you to talk about what your blank moment was, that you looked at this and said, this is what I need to do, and we're going to tie that into what you did in the Navy in our next segment.
Sure.
So for our friends out there that are listening, this is the Veteran Impact Show. Please follow us on Facebook. Please like our YouTube channel as we are trying to grow that. That is going to be the second half of the year was probably going to be my biggest project, is growing this up.
Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. Thanks to our great sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage Corporation and the Texas Veterans Chamber of Commerce. Now, let's continue this conversation.
Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show for all of our friends out there listening to us on terrestrial radio, especially our friends in South Texas. I'll share this quick story. I am the first Marine officer to be commissioned from the University of Texas at San Antonio. So my dad retired from the Air Force at Randolph. So my ties to South Texas are strong and powerful. And certainly our hearts go out to all of those families and all of those residents in Uvalde, Texas. We're talking about we're going to talk about what's right with America, not wrong, and that was part of what's wrong with America. And we're not going to go into that too much. In a way, it's been beaten to death. Hopefully, positive changes will come out of it. But we are with Chief T.C. Beckett, and we are talking about a veteran service organization. And one of these days, this is Veterans Produce will eventually be nationwide, and it will be a name that everybody knows. I truly believe this, TC. I think what you are doing is making an incredible difference by turning hydroponic and aquaponic greenhouses and building them out of shipping containers. The big containers you see. And by the way, the guy who created that idea, absolutely brilliant idea, to take a steel box, load it on a ship, and ship stuff around the world. Absolutely incredible. He passed away as a multimillionaire. He was an older gentleman, but absolutely brilliant idea. But you've taken this idea of his, and you're turning it into something that potentially is going to feed the nation. And you started out wanting to feed homeless veterans. We're going to talk about that in just a second, but I'd like you to talk about, you've got this 10 foot by 40 foot by less than 10 feet high shipping container. How many people does it take daily, weekly? How often does it have to be serviced? How many people does it take? Talk about that for just a second.
Sure. Thank you. So I talked about the poundage, the 240 pounds, and we traditionally harvest on Mondays. Mondays is a big day and we rely upon a lot of volunteers. We have got about 30 volunteers currently in our system. And so we take about 4 to 6 volunteers on Mondays to come in and help us with that harvest. And
Yep.
so with the harvest, we'll pull the whole rack, we'll pull the rack out to the front. We'll take them out and put them in the totes. And then those totes go into a cooler, and then all the equipment gets cleaned, and then we take the seedlings and transplant them back into that rack, and then take the rack and push it back into its place. And so 4 to 6 volunteers or more. It takes us several hours to harvest that amount. In fact, probably about 4 to 6 hours. And so the normal complement is about 1.5 to 2 people daily to run this.
Okay.
Now, so a shipping container, yes, it's not very wide. It's an 8-foot wide system, so you don't want 20 people. You're not going to put 20 people inside of a shipping container. So it takes 2 people, one in the back, one in the front, and it works out very well. So but on the harvest days, harvest and transplant days is when we need all hands on deck, and it's a lot of activity. So it's cleaning, it's transplanting, it's harvesting, it's quite an operation.
Okay, now when you've got people that are harvesting all of this, do you have a problem with people grabbing food and sneaking around back? And like I used to do when I worked in the library, I'd be reading the books, they'd be eating the food.
So yeah, well, actually, from time to time we'll stop and have lunch and we'll eat some of the produce that's there. But no, there's just so much to do. I mean, it's real, and we're talking hundreds and hundreds of plants at a time. So there's not really much time for breaks, unfortunately. It's, you got to get in there, get it out, and get it in the cooler and get to the next. And we were talking, hundreds and hundreds of plants have to be harvested each week. Hundreds.
Wow. It's just amazing how much you can grow, how quickly you can grow it.
Yeah.
And just it's all with water. And 90% of the water is basically being recycled. Although, the one thing I will say is that we are not gaining or losing water. There's the exact same amount of water on the planet that there was at the beginning of time. It hasn't changed. Water is the purest, most recyclable product. Well, it's not always pure anymore, but it is the most recyclable chemical. What is it? Water is water. I had to stop and think about that for a second.
Water, yes.
But
we'll call it an element.
Now, but and especially for our listeners, especially our listeners in South Texas, you can relate to this well. Water has been, from the day Texas was founded, has been a significant problem. If you are west of the Mississippi, and when I say west, I'm not talking about Iowa and Louisiana that have problems with flooding almost every year, it seems. But as you get west of those states, that line on either side of the Mississippi River, water is generally and has been one of our biggest, it's been top 5 every year problems. So to be able to create a system that will feed people, because, we think back to the 30s and, most of us can't remember those days. If Jim was here, I'd ask him what it was like back then when John Steinbeck was writing his great novels. We're going to harass Jim even if he's not with us right now. And Jim is my co-host, is at the Navy, on his way back from the Navy League meetings. But the droughts absolutely destroyed America's ability to produce food. And you've actually created a stopgap that can make a difference in that, and I think that is absolutely amazing. So it doesn't take a lot of people to run this. I asked you before about, many of our listeners have heard of Malcolm Gladwell. He wrote books like The Tipping Point, but he wrote one book called Blink, and it is about our ability to make a complex decision literally in the blink of an eye. The expression is in the blink of an eye. What was your blink moment that got you to look at this or create this and say, this is what I need to devote the rest of my life to?
Sure, I know exactly that moment. So it was a November, cold, wet, miserable night, and I was driving home, and I had passed this gentleman whom I had seen camped outside this warehouse down the street from my house, and I had seen him there for a few weeks. But this night, I felt compelled to stop in and just check on this guy and say, hey, dude, it's really miserable. Are you warm enough out here? And we got to talking, and I always wear, I don't have my ball cap on, I guess I'm out of uniform, but I always wear my ball cap, says Navy Retired Chief. And he saw that, and we got to talking, and he introduced himself as a Vietnam Army veteran. His name is Tony. And, at that point in time, it got very personal for me. We see homeless people all the time, but to have a combat veteran sleeping on the cold, wet streets down the street from my house, it got very personal for me. And I decided, I have to do something about this. My job in the Navy, I'm a chief petty officer. My job in the Navy was to take care of the folks at my command. Just because I'm retired doesn't mean I stop caring.
Right.
That kinship, that brotherhood between veterans is thicker than blood.
Charlie Mike.
I decided I had to do something about it. Charlie Mike. I had to do something about it. So I thought, well, I need to feed Tony. You've heard the adage, you give a man a fish and he eats for a day.
Right.
Well, so I started that, built a small greenhouse in Louisville, right down the street from my house, outgrew it, doubled the size. I've outgrew that. And so essentially, so then it became apparent, well, these folks need to learn how to grow their own food. Yep. I should teach them how to grow their own food. But it started when I met Tony that night, a cold, wet November, and it just made me mad. It broke my heart. I decided, I got to do something about this. And so I quote Travis Manion a lot. In fact, I wear their bracelet. And their motto is simply, if not me, then who?
Right.
It's that simple for me.
Great organization.
And that was my blink moment. Yeah. Great organization. So, that was it.
Absolutely amazing. And I'm flashing too, and one of our future guests, we're going to have Brian Aft on, and we're going to have the people from the Adaptive Training Foundation. But it's interesting because it's so similar that I hear these stories. And I talked about Homeless Veteran Services of Dallas, which is the oldest veteran resource center in the state of Texas. It's all privately run, as TC's organization is. We're not looking for government handouts. What we're looking for is just a little bit of assistance and a little bit of support. And I will remind you again, it's veterans.produce.org. You can go there, become a sustaining supporter. If we could get 1 in 10 of our listeners just to give $5 a month, the impact that it would make to feeding our homeless would be incredible. And to help grow this so that we're feeding more and more of the nation, I don't know why the head of Dallas ISD and Fort Worth ISD hasn't been on the phone to you to say, how do we put 2 or 3 of these in one of our locations and feed our kids? It's just.
So they haven't. However, Louisville ISD is, and we are building one for them.
Outstanding.
For their food. Yes. So that's actually starting very, very soon on top of everything else that we've got going on. It's a very exciting time. But so, yes, for one of the middle schools right down the street from our house in Louisville, we're starting a 30 by 50 greenhouse to serve the less fortunate children. That's exactly what that greenhouse is going to be built for. Built by veterans, run by veterans. We'll do the training, and then any excess food after the children have received what they need, any excess food then will go out to serve additional veterans. So, but yes, you're right. This model could be applied in a lot. I mean, there's a lot of need out there. Food insecurity is a huge growing problem, and this is certainly one way to solve that. So the container model, it took a few years to evolve, but it's a system where we could deploy locally and make a difference community by community. And so that's our goal, is to feed Tony one community at a time. And this system is a way to do that. So yes, it doesn't take much. We know that $17 feeds 30 veterans, or will feed one veteran for 30 days. And so that's a motto. That's a campaign we started out with many, many years ago, asking for reoccurring donations of $17, which will feed 30 veterans.
And we can find that on your webpage, correct? There it is. There's a donate button up in the top right-hand corner.
The big red donate button right there. Yes, sir. Oh, yes. Okay. We try to make it easy for folks. So, yes.
Yeah, folks, we can make it easy. You will not spend a better $17 a month. And if you've got to stop going to Starbucks for that super sugared latte, even once a week, just give up one latte a week and think about feeding 30 veterans for a day. Just absolutely incredible, making a real difference. Good. I absolutely love that.
Good, healthy food.
We try to break it down. I'm a Marine. I write with crayons. I'm quite proud of that. I've gotten rather proficient in it, but we try to keep it really, really simple for our listeners. TC, for just a second, you talked about taking care of your people as a chief in the Navy, and I think that is the principle of leadership that is the most common among all of our servicemen and women. I'll go ahead and be politically correct in the 21st century. But what specifically did you do in the Navy?
So my job, actually, I was an intelligence analyst, so strike warfare, counterterrorism, various other security-related aspects, but analyzing, identifying threat, making a decision of what needed to be done. So many different aspects of that, and that type of a job never ends. Actually, it's it never goes to sleep, and it's never done. It's never complete.
Right.
It's a very intense, detailed job. So yeah.
Yeah, I had a
intelligence work. Yeah.
Good buddy of mine who would have worked for you had you been assigned to Patch. Although I think he wound up getting out at the same rank you are now, but he absolutely loved it. Patch is the military base, and it's a joint military base, so there were all the services were represented there. It was what they call a joint command now, but that's what he did. Basically the same thing, but he was in the Air Force. And I tell this story because my wife and I spent 2 weeks with him and his wife just before they came back to the U.S. for his last assignment. And he was one of those guys, he loved being stationed overseas. And I knew a lot of guys like that as both an Air Force brat and as a Marine officer myself. He was in Japan and loved it. He was in Germany 2 or 3 times for tours. And Stuttgart is near Bavaria. It is literally one of the most beautiful places in the world. We absolutely loved it. This was my wife's tour, so we saw lots of cool castles and did lots of good walking. And she called me this morning. She's up in Washington walking up in the mountains right now, or she's done by now. Hopefully she's gotten back down the mountain and got her day going. But we are right up against another break, our last break. We are going to come back on the other side of this to wrap up our conversation about veterans produce with Chief T.C. Beckett. You are listening to the Veterans Impact Show dedicated to the concept of Charlie Mike. Continue the mission. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, I don't think we can find a better example of this. There are some great ones out there, and we are going to highlight them. But one of my favorites is Chief T.C. Beckett and Veterans Produce. We are the Veterans Impact Show, and we will be right back. All right, cool. We are still here for our Facebook crowd. Are still taping. I don't think Facebook gets to see us live today. A little bit of a technical difficulty, but this time we'll at least capture the whole show. So absolutely amazing. It's going to be a real...
One of the things that we didn't get a chance...
Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the things that we didn't get much of a chance to talk about, we talked about food insecurity. We talked about healthy food. So the increase in demand for food, the last numbers I heard through North Texas Food Bank, of which we're now a partner of, by the way, they've about 40% even during COVID. But a lot of those executive orders and all that to hold off evictions and the COVID subsidies and all that they're drying up now. So that the food banks are now seeing a huge increase just as of now, or just today, 40% increase in food demand. So the food insecurity problem is growing exponentially as more and more people find themselves out of work and out of subsidies. And so, but what the food banks are now focused on is realizing that long-term food storage is not the healthiest food for you,
no.
i.e. canned goods, high sodium, right? And so they have a targeted goal of replacing long-term food stores with 50% fresh produce. So protein and produce, two of which are products that we deliver or provide through our growing system. So protein and produce and fruits, by the way. We didn't talk much about that, although I did mention we've talked about cantaloupes and strawberries. But,
as we should. Like cantaloupes being the finest fruit on the planet. No bias on my part.
Yeah, okay, there you go. I kind of like strawberries, but
strawberries are awesome too.
But yeah, especially the big ones and big sweet ones. And so anyway, so that's a growing demand as well for.
So TC, you mentioned
produce.
Protein. Talk about how you're producing produce that's a protein substitute or supplementing protein, however you want to say that.
Oh, so there are produce products that are higher in protein. I'm referring to the aquaponic side. We have
talk about that.
Yeah, right. The fish. What do you do with the fish? It all works on fish water, but we did talk about the fish. So yes. So I have currently a batch of about 250 tilapia and big, huge fat tilapia. So the protein comes from our fish, so fresh water. Again, there's lots and lots of reasons why the aquaponics or hydroponics system makes sense. But if you look at feed ratio, it takes 26 pounds of feed to develop 1 pound of beef. 26 pounds of food to make 1 pound of beef, right? And fish, it's a 1-to-1. 1 pound of food makes 1 pound of fish, right? So, so the protein comes from the fish and lots of different varieties. I mean, every freshwater fish you can think of, shrimp, and prawns can all be grown this way, and they all provide a protein base and a value to the system.
Interesting. And we're going to talk about that when we come back for our radio audience. We've got about 15 seconds before we'll be back on the air with our radio listeners as we'll wrap up the show at the 10:25 mark. We're actually not quite an hour long. But here we go. We're coming back to the break.
Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. Thanks to our great sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage Corporation and the Texas Veterans Chamber of Commerce. Now, let's continue this conversation.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Chuck Wright interviewing Chief T.C. Beckett of Veterans Produce. You can find them at veteransproduce.org. Really recommend checking out the site. Consider being a $17 a month donor. They are doing some incredible work, but we got off, and our Facebook audience was listening to it, but I want our radio audience to hear it as well. Talk a little bit, and we were talking about protein. You talked about the fish. Let's talk about the types of fish that you grow and the fact that you can actually harvest them.
Oh, yes. So we like tilapia. They tend to grow pretty quick. At about 6 months, they can reach a harvest weight. But there's pretty much any freshwater fish you can grow. I've raised channel cats, big, huge channel cats. I'm currently raising perch, hybrid, koi, tilapia. Those are all that I've personally raised. But again, we're building a system up in Decatur that they're going to be raising bass. So again, freshwater fish is freshwater fish. The byproduct of fish is ammonia, and that's the basic ingredient, if you will, for how this whole system actually works. So that ammonia, I probably didn't talk about this. Scientifically, it goes through a nitrisis cycle and converts into nitrites and nitrates.
Oh, great. You're going to show off the fact that I flunked science.
Most of us did. But yes. We feed the fish feed the plants, and then we eat the fish.
Nice. I like it.
Life, my friend.
have you created your own cookbook where you talk about taking your tilapia and serving them with certain produce dishes?
So a very good question. No, it's a very good question. Not that we've created a cookbook. However, we have a cook on our staff, and he's going to be training veterans how to do that, how to pair certain kinds of foods together. In fact, one of our projects, which I probably haven't mentioned to you, is we're building a couple large commercial greenhouses down in College Station, where we will create, I think it's the first presence of a veteran food pantry. It'll be a complete encompassed kitchen, cafeteria, greenhouses, all using the food from that whole system. So we'll teach veterans how to cook, we'll feed veterans, we'll grow the food in the back. It'll be a complete, essentially a self-contained system.
Wow. That is absolutely amazing. And once again, we show the concept of Charlie Mike continuing the mission as you not only make a difference in the lives of our homeless veterans, but you're actually creating an ecosystem to grow this and to feed the entire nation, and I think it's absolutely incredible. Yes. Quickly, you mentioned you're a partner with the North Texas Food Bank, run by my friend Erica Yeager. I love throwing that in. She always gets a chuckle out of being mentioned on the air. Great lady doing great things, and I believe I have introduced you to Gerald Nelson, who I believe is now running the Little Elm Food Bank, and if I haven't, I need to do that.
No. We're actually going to start delivering up there on Monday, in fact.
Oh, wow. That's outstanding. Gerald is an incredible individual. And again, another one of those veterans. He was a chaplain in the Army. I give him a hard time about that because he'll say hua and I'll say gesundheit. And for the veterans, they all get that. For everybody else, they don't get it. So we're down to our last 2 minutes of this week's show. This has been absolutely incredible. I wish I had at least 2 more segments to drill into some of this, but we're going to leave it with this. Chief T.C. Beckett from Veterans with an S, produce.org. Please check out their site. Please consider them. They are making a huge difference. I promise you by the end of this year, we will have a container down at the Homeless Veteran Services of Dallas. So our homeless veterans in South Dallas, filling one of our greatest needs for homeless veterans, will actually be serving fresh and healthy produce. I think it's absolutely incredible. Jim likes to close this out with a prayer. I may be leading a little bit early to go to the prayer, but I'm not used to doing this. But dear Lord, we may know you by many names, but we very much, especially those in the veteran community and our first responders, are trying to walk your walk. We are trying to make the world a better place. I'm honored that my friend, Chief T.C. Beckett, joined us for the show today. Please look out after all of us, our veterans, our first responders, and everybody in America, everybody around the world. Let go of the hate. Let's figure out what we can do together, not doing apart. Thank you so much for joining the Veteran Impact Show, where we promote the concept of Charlie Mike, continuing the mission. And I think for everybody who's been listening, you have heard an outstanding example of somebody who is walking that walk. Thank you so much for tuning in.